The views, comments, and opinions of the following program do not necessarily reflect those of Morris Media Studios, MorrisMediaLive.com, or its affiliates. Listener discretion is advised.
All hail to our school, the school we love so well. Loyal we are to our school. We strive to do our best wherever we may go. Loyal we are to our school. Our color all gold means to us salvation. Purple the tie that binds our hearts. And hail to our school, the school we love so well. Always is Qumran High.
Welcome to the Qumran Report. May the peace and blessings of the life-giving creative spirit be upon you and upon your family. My name is Melvin Ishmael Johnson, coming at you live from Morris Media Studios. Our calling number is 1-323-293-3375. Now, this week on the Qumran Report, our topic is Coleman High School, Greenville, Mississippi. Coleman High School, Greenville, Mississippi, one of the most important historical high schools in the Mississippi Delta, and the foundation for the present black community in Greenville, Mississippi. I think it's very important to understand that Greenville High School is not the foundation of the black community in Greenville, but Coleman High School. And we're going to talk about that in details throughout the show, because we know in our past, all the way up until 1960, Greenville High was a total of 100% segregated schools where the whites went, and Coleman High was the historical school where blacks went since 1922. Now, my name is Melvin Ishmael Johnson, and I am the author of the play Bright New Day about the history of Coleman High School. I myself graduated from Coleman High School in 1966. Now, how did this play come about? It was because of my brother, James Shug Johnson, who asked me to write a play about Coleman High School and provided me with so much of the information for the play. Now, my brother, James Shug Johnson, he passed on May the 29th, 2019. And in a minute, I hope to have on the line his son, James D. Johnson. And we're going to do a little short interview with him. So right now, I'd like to move to that interview with his son, James D. Johnson. It's a short 3-minute interview. Let me ask you this about in terms of what do you think about, Mississippi has a huge African American population down here, but I think consistently it's always go Republican. I think it went Republican this time for the election for President Obama. What do you think the African Americans down in Mississippi? Since it's a huge majority African American state, don't have the impact of turning this into a Democratic stronghold.
Well, in order to do that, people would just have to vote. I really don't think people vote like they should. Perhaps we could do more educating. We could do more voter registration drives, more pushes to get people actually out to the polls. I don't know, but I really think that the major problem with that is that people are just not getting out to vote. African Americans especially.
Okay. people always they talk about that brain drain thing. We see it in the athletes where the big schools with the huge reputation and the money, the Ivy League schools, they get the Big Ten schools. They get the best athletes that come from the South and lead I don't want to say the inferior athlete, but not the top athletes, and that always keep the athletic schools from the historical blacks college, on that lower level in terms of competing with them. The same thing happened in terms of academics, in terms of where you see the best minds. They grab them and they end up at the Harvard, the Ivy League schools, the Ohio States, stuff like that. And then at what do you think the effect of that on education, especially in the South, in the Mississippi Delta?
Well, I think that academics, like most other people, are drawn to places where they can advance personally, where they can have grand benefits and really be appreciated for the work that they do or for their scholarship. And so sometimes when you look at this region, it can be intimidating to some. And so it's not as, I've found it very difficult to remain in the Delta, actually. And it's because, since of course most college grads feel like they can save the world. I too was above that. I had that opinion, and so since I've been back after graduating undergrad, masters, and specialist, I have found that most of the world just doesn't want to be saved, and so people have not been as welcoming to me as I anticipated. And so sometimes I don't know if it's that your own are not receptive to you when you come back, but.
You mean in terms of keeping the best talent down here? Okay.
Well, some people are just not receptive to change, and I don't know if it's a fact that people are set in their ways, for lack of a better term, but or intimidated by young or new talent, or intimidated by intellectualism. I'm not sure.
Well, let me ask you. Okay, who am I speaking with?
This is James D. Johnson.
Hello.
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you now. Who am I speaking with?
This is James D. Johnson.
Hey, how you doing?
Great, how are you?
Fine. Welcome to the Qumran Report.
Thank you.
Look, first of all, tell our listening audience a little about yourself, the kind of work you're involved in back there in the Mississippi Delta.
Okay, I am, of course, James D. Johnson. I am currently serving as principal of O'Bannon Elementary School. I've been in education about 10 years. Prior to becoming a principal, I taught high school English at O'Bannon High School as well as Greenville Western High School.
Now, a few years ago, we talked about the state of education in the Mississippi Delta. So what is the present state of education in the Mississippi Delta, in your opinion?
Well, as you may know, the Delta is certainly a region characterized by immense poverty, low socioeconomic, and there's somewhat still a large racial divide. So when you take those factors into consideration, you can't help but to recognize the impact it has on education. So predominantly, we see most of our African-American students who are in public schools, and then on the opposite end, most of our white students tend to go to the private academy. So with that being said, the Delta schools generally suffer from low teacher retention. It's hard to retain teachers. It's hard to attract quality teachers. So the education part tends to suffer in that respect. But I will say the Delta has made some progress. The progress has not been enough, and we're still hoping that we will find the solution to whatever it is that will change the face of the Delta.
Is it tied into getting more federal money into the Delta for education, the budget into that?
We could certainly use additional funding, and I think that funding would better be suited not only attracting teachers, but also building teacher capacity. So when we look at education, we also have to look at whether or not the teachers we put into the classrooms are high quality and whether they have the cultural mindset to serve students in the Mississippi Delta.
Now, let me ask you this: how can we keep so many of our talented young people from leaving the Mississippi Delta, and also entice some of the Mississippi native like myself, etc., to come back and survive from an economic point of view in the Mississippi Delta?
Well, it certainly begins with investment. Many people leave the Delta because they do not feel like the community supports what they have to offer. So when we look at encouraging people to return, then we must treat these people with respect. We must treat them with dignity, and we have to act like they actually have something that will help the community move forward. And one thing about the Delta, it's a very unique place, and often people don't understand it who are not from the Delta. So who better to change the place than we who have grown up in the Delta and who anticipate coming back to make positive change.
Now, how about the amount? You know, one thing I noticed about Greenville when I was doing my study on Coleman High is that Greenville is 82% black, 82% African American. So I guess that would mean that the African American, from a political point of view, have achieved more power in determining the shape of their education system, and also to develop more after-school programs. Is there still a big need for after-school programs in the Mississippi Delta?
Yes, there is. And in fact, when we look at after-school programs, we have to look at a transformational model. Sometimes when I tell people about transformation, I like to use the Harlem Children's Zone as an example. So it's not only transforming kids' lives when it comes to the after-school program, but it's also important that we work with parents and we work in the homes, and that this is a whole community transformation. So it goes beyond education. We start with education, and we reach out into other areas that might impact students' lives. Like I stated, most of our students come from a high poverty background. So it's one thing to provide that educational need, but we also have to look at other parts of Maslow's hierarchy. What's the medical needs? What are the psychological needs? What are the social needs? So when we look at after-school programs, we have to consider all of these factors in order to do true community transformation.
Yeah, Dr. Abraham Maslow hierarchy of needs model. Let me ask you this then. What is the in the 60s, right after the Civil, you familiar with the Coleman Report?
Vaguely, yes.
Okay, Coleman Report, the original name of that was Equality of Education in the United States. It was the first time it was a rider, it was a 2-year rider after they signed the Civil Rights Bill in 1965, the first time that they studied the equality of education in the United States of America. And one of the cities and high schools that they studied was Coleman High School, the 1967 class, in which your aunt and uncle come out of, Shirley and Richard. And the top sociologist was Robert Coleman, and he stressed that he felt that the study showed that blacks learn better in the presence of white, and that led to the desegregation of schools all over the nation. But I always wondered, how could he say that when at the time we was in a totally segregated school system?
Yes, well, the best practice would be for students to be exposed to people who look both like themselves as well as people who do not. Now, when we look back at that time frame that you referenced, certainly schools were separate, but they certainly were not equal. And when you follow that model, then we can't say that equality was a part of the equation, because you may have had teachers who were not black teaching black students, but were they providing the type of education that was truly needed for advancement of these students? Were these students also given the resources that their white counterparts were given? So we always have to look at not only quality, but also equity.
Okay, wonderful. Now, one more question. Why do you think Coleman High was so important to your father? Because he was passionate about, he knew I was off into playwriting, and he stayed on top of me, and he kept saying, you're writing all these plays about Marcus Garvey and people like that. Why don't you write a play about Coleman High? And that's what led, why do you think it was so important to him, Coleman High?
From what I have heard from different stories he's told me, Coleman, and what I've researched myself, Coleman has certainly been a marker in the Greenville community. Coleman has produced a number of African Americans who have gone ahead and excelled and have contributed to society. It was that place for African Americans during that time frame. And for him, it was an outlet for education. It was an educational oasis. It was where he met people who he kept in contact with for years. And it just, at that time, perhaps Greenville High was the school for students, but Coleman produced just as many great people as Greenville High, if not more.
Yeah.
And sometimes we forget that.
Exactly. Okay, then, thank you very much for calling in. Looking forward to talking to you in person again soon.
Okay, I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye. Okay, that was James D. Johnson, the son of my brother James Shug Johnson, who was the inspiration for the play Bright New Day about the whole history of Coleman High. Okay, who do we have online? Who do we have on the line?
Freddie Johnson out of Memphis, Tennessee.
Hey, Reverend Freddie Johnson. How you doing?
Fine. How you doing this evening?
Fine. Welcome to the Qumran Report.
Well, thank you.
Can you tell our listening audience a little about your church, your location, etc., where you at, like that?
Well, we organized a church called Zebedee Baptist Church. We're about a year and a half old now. And God is blessing us. We're doing just well, just fine. And we're located in Memphis, Tennessee. You might not know the area, but we're in the White Haven area over by Brooks and 3rd. And we do outreach ministries. We do evangelistic ministries. We just ask people to come and visit the church. And when we get them there, we get Jesus Christ to them.
Okay. Well, and also the last time we was talking, you was talking about developing how important it was to develop a prison ministers for those coming up out of prison also.
Yes.
Now, maybe we'll talk about that in details another time, but let me ask you this. What years did you go to Coleman High?
59 to 63.
And you graduated in 63?
63, yes, it is.
Now, what do Coleman High mean to you?
What do Coleman High mean to me?
Yes.
I'm going to say it like old school. A whole lot.
Yes.
Well, you know, the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Now, Coleman, you know, in those days, after came out of elementary school, that's what happened to me. In the 9th grade through the 12th grade, I went to Coleman High. And we had some fabulous teachers. You know, I think some of the best instructors in the whole state of Mississippi. And they really, you know, focus on learning, teaching the students. And that way, like I say, reading, they taught well, reading lessons and, you know, homework and things of that nature. Writing, I learned how to write real well. Just by the help of many instructors at Coleman High. And also arithmetic. Learned how to do arithmetic real well. So we had some real good arithmetic teachers, math teachers, algebra, you know, however you want to say it, we had the teachers right there at Coburn High.
Yep. And you also jumped a couple of grades, too. I guess you were so smart that they moved you up. Huh? What grades was that?
I didn't jump. They promoted. How you say that? They skipped me 2 grades.
Mm-hmm.
Simply because what I was just saying about picking up reading, writing, and arithmetic. I was at what's the name of that school? Greenville Industrial College.
Mm-hmm. GIC.
GIC.
Mm-hmm.
And when they transferred me to Junior L. Armstrong, and between those 2 years that I was at Junior L. Armstrong, I got promoted a couple more grades because I guess they figured that I was picking up on what they was teaching real well.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, they must have thought that I should be, raised up a couple grades. So that's how I got, skipped a couple grades and got into Coburn High.
Yeah, I did just the opposite. I was such a juvenile delinquent, didn't want to go to school. I messed around and missed her.
Well, I didn't want to go either, but, since I was there,
yeah,
I might well do the best. Since I was there, I might well do the best I can.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you.
If I did, I would have to face a guy named Reverend J.J. Johnson.
Yes, exactly. Now, let me ask you this. Greenville High, when we was going to Coleman High, Greenville High was the school for whites. It was totally segregated, and even today, even when I go back to visit, I have never set foot on the campus of Greenville High. And now when you look at Greenville High, it is over 90%, probably 98% African American, something like that. And most of the whites are moved into, as James D. Johnson mentioned earlier, have moved into private schools. So how do we get a movement started? I'm going to talk to Roosevelt, Reverend Johnson later on about that, because we already had a discussion with the mayor about it. But how do we get a movement started to change Greenville High to Greenville Coburn High, since Greenville High is over 90%, and so many of the youngsters look at Greenville High as their foundation and have totally forgotten that the real foundation for the black community in Greenville is Coleman High. So how do we get that movement started?
Now, your question is, how do we get the movement started to change Greenville High into Greenville Coburn High?
Yes, because
I'm going to have to be totally honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, and I do know.
Mm-hmm.
I know the people is going to have to get involved.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whether the people will get involved.
Mm-hmm.
Now, personally speaking, I don't know nothing about Greenville High. I'm like you. I never set foot on that campus. And when I left Coburn High, Coburn was yet a high school for a few more years.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm in the Air Force, in the military, and when Greenville High became the high school, Coburn became the middle school, I don't know nothing about that. All I know, all I can say is, I think it would be a good thing if Greenville High could change that name, maybe to not Greenville Coburn High, or maybe like a name like Coburn number 2 or something like that, like they did with the number 1 and the number 2 school in our days.
Mm-hmm. And now I think we have a foundation because last year in Richmond, Virginia, you had the same kind of situation. You had a school that used to be all white, and it was named after this Confederate general. But over a period of time, it became like 99% African American, and they changed the name to President Obama. They named the school after him. And just recently, when I was down south a few weeks ago, I found out that the school in Leland had changed their name. They had switched to a long-time educator who taught at that school, and now the school is named after. And I think it's so important. And before all of the Coleman High alumni pass away, you know, I think it's very important, especially since that school over there now called Greenville High is 98% African American, 98% black, you know. But anyway, any final comments? And remember, we coming with this Coleman High play. We're coming the Christmas, New Year's. We're going to do a professional reading down there. And then coming for the 2020 reunion in June, July 2020, we're going to do a full-scale, I'm coming down, spend a couple months, and mount a full-scale run of the play about Coleman High. Mm-hmm.
Good. That sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there's things that I really don't know about Coleman High, but I'm really just excited to learn about that school even more.
Yes.
Because like I said, and when I first started talking to you, that's where I got my basic education from.
Exactly.
And I found out when I left out of Greenville and started meeting different peoples of different races. Even some of the blacks didn't have such an education that I had because of Coleman High.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very, very important. And I think with the huge 82% black population down there, from a political point of view, that we're going to have to start supporting people who push that agenda. And also the agenda, another thing that bothered me, we grew up over in Brown's Addition, and that area is absolutely tore up now. So I think the people who represent that area, either we got to, as a unit, push that person to begin to use some kind of clout, the huge African-American percentage that we have, to redevelop that area, to create some jobs for our young people over there, or find somebody who come out of that area and support that person. That's who should be sitting on the so-called city council or board of supervisors or whatever they got down there now. But it is, yeah, it's no longer that we're going to allow that to happen and having a huge majority African-American population in our hometown, knowing how we come up in Greenville, Mississippi, to allow those areas to still be tore up like that. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay. So, thank you very much, Reverend Freddie Johnson, Memphis, Tennessee, Zebedee Baptist Church.
Memphis, Tennessee.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
All right. I'll go. Bye-bye.
Mm-hmm. Now, just let me read something about Coleman High School. Coleman High School, which is located on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, Greenville, Mississippi, which is part of Highway 1, where I grew up at, 1 block from that. It's named for Lizzie W. Coleman, who was principal of the No. 2 elementary school. Coleman High School was among the first high school for African Americans in the Mississippi Delta. The school served as Greenville's main school for African American until 1970. First located on Nelson Street, the school moved to Cleveland Street in 1922. The present school, designed by architect N.W. Overstreet, was built here in 1952. Lizzie Coleman's motto was, "Burn the midnight oil and be prepared." So that was Lizzie Coleman. Now, also, just let me mention a couple things, because my hometown of Greenville, two important elements that's historic from a national point of view. I'm going to talk about it a little in details in a little while. We mentioned earlier about the Coleman Report. The Coleman Report was the first time that there was a study of the equality of education in the United States of America. And it came when President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Bill. And you still remember that famous picture. They have Dr. King and all of the civil rights workers standing in the White House and all of that. But what came with that signing of the Civil Rights Bill was a 2-year rider for the first time in the history of the United States to study the equality of education in the United States of America. And the person that they got to do that was a person who was alumni out of the University of Chicago, and he was a top sociologist of that time, Dr. Coleman, and he developed what became the Coleman Report. He studied that, and in it, his results laid the foundation for the desegregation of schools throughout the United States of America when he put forth the theory that I don't agree with, never did when I read the information, that blacks, African Americans, learn better in the presence of white, because it could. The data to me in the South wasn't there when you in a totally segregated society. Where you get your data from? How could you say that? See, but who do we have online?
Rashad Johnson.
Hello, who am I speaking with?
Rashad Johnson.
Rashad.
Yes.
Hey, welcome to the Qumran Report.
Yeah, I'm waiting to talk to Ishmael.
Okay, I'm here right now. Let's talk a little about what years did you go to Coleman High?
Who do we have online? This is Rashad.
Yeah, can you turn your radio down?
Rashad. Yeah. Hey, welcome to the Qumran Report. Hey, peace and blessings be upon you.
Rashad.
Yeah.
Turn the radio off. Turn it down.
Let's talk a little about what years did you go to Coleman High? I went to Coleman High from 1961 to 1967. Yeah, can you turn your radio down? He's turning it down right now, but it seems like turn it down. Just a minute. See right here. Rashad. Okay. Not all the way down.
Okay.
Peace and blessing be upon you, my brother.
Yeah, how you doing?
I'm doing all right, alhamdulillah.
Okay, come a little closer to the mic.
I'm to the mic right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's talk a little about, when did you come to Coleman High?
I went to Coleman High from 1961 to 1967.
1961 to 1967.
Yes.
And
I graduated in 1967, and I played basketball that year.
Okay, let's talk. You was also into sports. What kind of reputation did Coleman have as a sports team?
The best it was. There was no other team in the state could beat Coleman High. Coleman High won championships almost every year that I was over there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. In football, basketball, track.
All of the girls and the boys.
Mm-hmm.
Was the best in the state.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I have a strong feeling for Coleman High inside of me.
Mm-hmm. But look, let me ask you this, because I think about it all the time. You know, when we was down in the South, throughout not just Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, Tennessee, all of those areas, you had these schools now which are powerhouse. You look at Alabama, you know, every year they win just about either they win the national champions or they played for the national champion. You look at Ole Miss, you look at Mississippi State, LSU, you go all these Southern powerhouse. And during that time, a black couldn't hardly walk on campus. It was so much going on. And you look at it now, what are your thoughts on what have happened with that, where all of this talent, all of this athletic talent, as it went to these schools that was told to segregate, especially Alabama. I still remember George Wallace standing in the door to keep black people from going to school. And now all these black athletes running up in these schools and leaving their communities in poverty-stricken shape. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts is, like, most of them run to these colleges because they want to have a better chance to turn pro. Mm-hmm. Once they turn pro, when they get financially established, it's on them to come back to help the community, to help them to get where they were at this point.
Mm-hmm. Why you think so many don't come back to help their community? Even today, you got all these super rich athletes that come from these areas, and these areas are still suffering. You look at, and even when they come out of the cities, you look at areas like Detroit and Chicago, St. Louis, all these areas that are just tore up from an economic point of view.
Well, I feel they got an inferior complex about the Delta.
Mm-hmm.
They still look on the Delta as not an organized community.
Mm-hmm.
Because when they come through, all they see is poverty. You know, they see rundown houses, and they figure that since I done got higher education, I don't need to come back down to the South.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll find today that many of them coming back to the South simply from the fact the ones that's up there in different areas of the North, they're suffering.
Mm-hmm.
They poverty, you know, got black on black killing. They piled into each other, living on the streets and everywhere. You know, but Coburn High taught us how to be men.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they just, I went through Coburn High, and I always loved the Coburn High. I remember when I first saw Suge play on the basketball team, and that's what I said that I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I got a chance a few times to see him play basketball, and they had the best team and won the championship that year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
and that's why we're going to have this push, not only to bring this Coburn High play back down there, because it is a lot of Coburn High alumni all over the United States.